So now I get to talk to you about my most favorite part of Google, and that is Google Scripts. I've started working on learning how to script things about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, and really felt like it's been a rewarding experience. So I'm just going to give you a pretty brief introduction to Google Scripts, and I'm going to do that by showing you a script that I wrote for a form on my website. So I created a form and I embedded it in my website. And the script that I wrote is attached to the spreadsheet that my form is feeding. So if you don't know anything about Google Forms, when you create a form, there are two ways that you can look at the responses. And it might be helpful if I show you how to do that. So I'm going to go to my form, and I click this responses at the top, and I can look at my responses here in the form, but the best way to do it is to have that feed into a spreadsheet. So when you create the form and you choose a spreadsheet as the response destination, what it does is it takes all of the questions and it puts them in the first row. And so beginning with the second row are the things that I have done as far as I went and took the quiz, because I need my script to know what the correct answers to the questions are. So hopefully that makes sense. So let's talk about how to access a script. Where do you go to do any sort of scripting? You have to use the spreadsheet. So you can do scripting on any of Google's apps, but for the purposes of what we're talking about right here, we're going to access that through the spreadsheet. And what this means is that the script that we've written is bound to the spreadsheet. So actions on the spreadsheet are what's going to cause the trigger for the script, which I will talk about last in this video. So we go to the Tools menu, and the second thing that you see is Script Editor. So if I click Script Editor, it's going to pull up the code that I've already written. I know this looks like a lot of code. You can see it's about 98 lines of code, but every single one of these kind of tan colored lines is an explanation of what each line of the code does. So in reality, this is actually about 35 or 37 lines of code. It's not really that much, but I'm going to go through step by step. And I think it might be helpful if we make this a bit larger so that you guys can see what we're looking at. I'll give us all the screen real estate we can handle here, and we'll go from there. So let's start at the very top. So within a script, if you want to do something, you start with a function. And when you create a new, let's say that you create a new script file, my new script file, this is what it'll come up with. It'll have a function already written. So whatever you want this to be called, you can change the name of that. But in general, you're going to be doing some kind of function. So that's what we've done here. And I name my functions based on what they do. So this one's called grade exam. And I like to capitalize that second letter. It makes it a little bit easier for me to see. That's typical in JavaScript, as you can see. And that actually is the language that we're using here, is JavaScript. So don't worry about anything up here right now. We'll talk about some of those things later. Let's just start looking at the code. So anything that has this / in front of it, this isn't actually code. This is what's called a comment. So if you comment a line of code, so this line of code right here, if I wanted to maybe not run that line whenever I run this script, I could just comment it out like that, and notice that everything turns that kind of tan color. But that's actually not what I want to do, so I'm going to uncomment that because I need all of these variables here for my script to work. One way of doing scripts is to declare all of your variables at the top. For me personally, I like it neater like that. So every one of these that have a comma separating it. So SS is one variable, S is a variable, rows is a variable, calls is a variable, and so on. You just declare your variables by putting it after VAR. Now, instead of doing that, if I wanted to, I could come down and say VAR, and then I'm declaring those variables in each individual place. So see how those turn blue? That means that I've declared them as a variable. But as I said, I find that to be kind of messy, and I would prefer to type as little as possible because I'm exceptionally lazy. So I'm going to uncomment this and notice that these turn kind of a darker blue, but that's how JavaScript is letting you know that that is a variable that has been declared. When you declare it, it's this bright blue. So first thing we need to do is we need to get a little bit of information about the spreadsheet. One more thing about variables. I start with probably these four because I'm generally going to find the spreadsheet. I'm going to get whatever sheet we're talking about on that spreadsheet. I'm going to find out how many rows there are, and I'm going to find out how many columns there are. Then once I declare those variables and do these things, I'm going to come back up here. If I need to add a variable, I just do a comma and new variable. And now I have a variable called new variable. But I don't really need that one. I just wanted to show you that as an example. You can call a variable anything you want. Now you can't call it new because that is some specific piece of JavaScript. So there are some things that you're limited on what you can actually name a variable. Okay, so I need to get some basic information about my spreadsheet. Which spreadsheet do I want to look at? Well, in this case, I want to get the active sheet. So which one of Google apps am I going to use to do that? I'm going to use the spreadsheet app. And the really nice thing about Google Scripts is, so if I type spreadsheet app and then I put a dot, it pulls up for me all of the things that I can choose from to do in the spreadsheet app. And one of those things is called Get Active. That's actually not what I wanted because that's getting the active sheet. I want to get the active, and this tells you what it's getting. So I want to get the active spreadsheet. And you end lines of code in JavaScript with a semicolon. So which sheet do I want to get? Because my spreadsheet may have more than one sheet. If I make a new sheet here, I could do something on this sheet. I would just tell it in that case to get, sorry, I went the wrong way. I would tell it to get the sheet by name, and that name would be get sheet 2. But in this case, I want it to get form responses 1, which is the name of this sheet that's going to have all of my form data in it. So far I have told my function, or my script rather, which spreadsheet to use and which sheet within that spreadsheet. That's why this is called SS for spreadsheet, and this is called S for sheet. I'm using this variable, which is the same thing as me taking all of this that I just did right here and copying and pasting it right here. But anytime you see that variable, this is what it does. So anytime SS is put here, it's going to do whatever I told SS to do. Same thing with S, which is the sheet. In that sheet, I want it to get how many rows I have, and I'm going to call that variable rows. And this is only looking at the rows with data. That's an important piece as you go further into scripting, because there's another command called get max row, which is all the rows in the sheet, and get max column, which is all the columns in the sheet. But in this case, we're only concerned with the ones that have data. Okay, so now that I know how many rows I have, I know how many columns I have, I know which sheet I'm on, and I know which spreadsheet I'm using, I need to actually get those values. And so here I'm telling I'm creating what's called an array, and I'm getting those values in a format of an array. So I'm going to get a range from my sheet. So this is my sheet, and I'm going to get some range, and I'm going to start with row number 1, column number 1, and I'm going to go through the last row and the last column. And what am I going to do when I get that range? I'm going to get all of the values that exist there. So I'm getting all of the information here, here, and here through this last column. So I'm going to have an array that has 1, 2, 3, 3 rows of data, and each of those rows of data are going to have however many M is. I don't know. I can't count in my alphabet like that. I don't know. Okay, so now we've gotten our values from the spreadsheet. Here's a key piece that's very important. There are ways that you can script things where you go and you only get the values from the sheet. If I just need this value in, say, row 3 and column F, I can say go to row 3 and go to column F. But basically, that is the equivalent of me making a phone call to the spreadsheet and getting one piece of information. What's better is for me to get an array of information, and I call the spreadsheet one time, and then I can reference that array right here and tell it to reference row 0 of that array. So this is telling me which part of the values array is the key for the spreadsheet. So I need to know, like, this first row right here is the key to my spreadsheet. Every single column A is going to be a timestamp. Every single column B is going to be a first name. C is going to be a score, and so on and so on. It is important for me to point out here that every one of these columns were made from questions on my form, except for this one. I added this. I like to have the score next to the name so I can see that real easily. So all of these other columns come from the form. Okay, let's move forward. So now that's my key for the spreadsheet. So again, I like to name my variables so that I can know what I'm talking about, my spreadsheet key. Now I actually have an exam key, and this is going to be the row that has the correct answers. So this has the questions, this has the correct answers. So let me debug this real quick and show you something so I can pull this values array so you can get an idea of what it looks like. So here's my values array right here, and notice it says that it has 3 rows in it. So row 0 has 13 values, row 1 has 13 values, row 2 has 13 values. That's actually something that's really important, because if you look at our spreadsheet, we start with 1 and go 2, 3. But in JavaScript, you start with 0 and go 1, 2. So when you're going between rows on a spreadsheet and rows on an array, you need to account for that with subtracting one value, and you'll see that here in a minute. So my spreadsheet key, this tells me, like, this is all of my questions. And we get undefined down here, these values that say undefined, because we didn't go far enough into our script to get those values. So my exam key starts with answer key. I can't remember actually what I should be saying to you right now. So I just mainly wanted to let you see the values array. So this is everything that's on row 1, everything that's on row 2, everything that's on row 3, and notice that I said those. I'm thinking about the spreadsheet. This is row 1, row 2, row 3, but in my array, my values array, it's 0, 1, 2. Okay. So let me get rid of this. Get back to our code. That's one way that you can look and see what values you're looking at. So if you want this to go through a specific line of code and see what values you're going to be pulling from the sheet to see if things line up the way you want them to, you can just click on a number and it'll put a red dot there. And when I go to debug, it will only run and stop right here and show me the values for everything before that. So that's what I just did. It's called debugging. Okay, so I need to know which column, which array value contains the student's email. So in this case, I need to look at my spreadsheet key and I need to get the index of that email. Well, the question that asks for a valid email address, I need to know what column that's on. So I know that my email addresses are going to be where this question is. So I don't care that it's in column D. I want my script to find that value and assign it here because I'm going to need that value later. I'm doing the same thing for the score and the same thing for the very first question. So my start row is where I'm going to start looking at questions, and that is going to be this is my very first question. So I'm looking at my spreadsheet key and I'm looking for an index of something in that very first line of my spreadsheet, first row here. So if I needed the timestamp, I would say, what's the index of timestamp? What's the index of please provide a valid email address? I know that's my email index. Okay, now I need to find out what is the student's name, and I'm going to use that index that I used a minute ago. So I'm going to say, look at the values and look at rows -1. And in this case, we're only going to be looking at the last row. We don't care about anything that's happened before because this script is going to run every single time that the form is submitted. So we're only going to be looking at that last row. So we're looking at values, we're looking at the last row of values, and we need to get whatever value is in the student name index. So that's going to give me that student's name. In this case, it would be my name. So this is the value that it's looking for. Oops, sorry about that. Same thing with the student email, except this time I'm using the email index, not the student name index. Looking on the same row, looking in the same array. Now I'm going to send an email in this particular script, so I need to make a message. And so I'm going to just break this down as quickly and easily as I can. This message, to start out with, I'm going to send this email or this stuff right here to every single student. Now, if I have some students who miss something, I'm actually going to add something to this in just a minute. But every email will start out with this information in it. And so these two things right here, this /n/n, those are carriage returns. And this just means that I can continue on to the next row instead of typing this until it's, 5,000 pixels wide and I can't even see what the very beginning of it was. So that's all these are. We can talk about that later if you have questions. But each one of these /ns, that's a carriage return. And that may make more sense when you see an actual email. Okay, so now I know the student's name, I know their email address. Now I want to look at the exam key and I want it to compare to the student's answers. So I'm going to create a loop and I'm going to have every single student answer compare itself to the exam key. So I'm going to start with the column that is my start column, which was what does MT mean, which is my very first question. So I'm telling this loop where to start. And I'm telling it how long to go because I want it to go as long as the SS key has values in it. And I want it to increase by 1 each time. So the first time through this loop, it's going to get the student's answer, and it's going to get the key, and then it's going to compare those two things. And if they are equal, we're going to increase the raw score by 1. Otherwise, if it's not equal, we're going to add this information to what the message already was. We're going to add this information below that. So we're going to do 2 hard carriage returns and say what the question was, and then say you answered and put their answer, but the correct answer was this. And we're going to do that until there are no more values. So that is an automated loop, and it'll do it for however many questions we have. There's probably like 8 or 9 questions maybe. So this is not going to take very long to run at all. Okay, so I'm going to take that raw score. That's going to give me a count of how many correct answers they got right. And I'm going to take that raw score, and I'm going to divide it by the total number of questions. And I'm going to multiply that by 100, which is going to turn it into a percentile. And I want it to be in 0 decimal places. So that's what this to fixed means. So I'm telling it to be a number. Take whatever this is and make it into a number. Because if it's not a number, then I can't use this to fixed. If it's a string or if it's an array or something like that, I need it to be an actual number, because this command right here will only work on numbers. Okay, so now I have the correct value, and I want to go back into the spreadsheet, and I want to put the score in for the student. And I've already run this one time, so in this particular case, I made a 100%. So the script actually put that in there. So let me just take this out, and we'll run this script, and you can see what happens. I'll just click run, and we'll go back over here, and there my score shows up. That's how I know that the script is done. So every time I submit this form right here, which would be the preview form, every time this is submitted, this script is going to run. And what it's going to do is it's going to check those answers using the loop that we made up here. And then it's going to take their raw score and convert it into a decimal. Convert it into a percentile. And it's going to put that in the sheet. Now, if our score is less than 69, that's a problem. As a teacher, I have a lot of scores to look at. I want to very quickly and easily see that somebody is below 70%. So if it's less than or equal to 69, I want it to set the score or set the font color to white, and I want it to set the background to red. So real quick, let me just go in here and we'll copy this, and we'll take the score out, and I'm going to go down here and I'm going to just delete some answers real quick. And I'm probably going to be below 70% there. So let's see if this will work. I'll run it, and now I'll come back over here, and yes, you can see that because I didn't answer those questions, I got a 56%, and it set the background as red and set the score as white. That's exactly what I wanted it to do. Now the other thing that it did is it sent me an email. It sent an email using the mail app, and it sent it to this email address, which is mine. In the case of the student, it would be theirs. And it had this in the subject line, EdTechWorks quiz results. And the message was, let's go back to the one where I scored a 100. Let me get back to my other email here. And I should have a couple of emails, probably, maybe. There we go. I've got 3 of them. And so in the one where I made a 100%, you can see it says, Jody, thank you for testing your knowledge. Your score on this quiz is, and so it looks like I need to do a little tweaking on that because it didn't actually give me the score. I think because it's looking for a value there first. probably need to have a delay on that mail. Same thing here, probably says undefined, but it does say, here's the question. EdTechWorks was created using Google Sites. You answered, and I didn't answer anything. The correct answer was true. The domain EdTechWorks, again, I didn't answer anything, and the correct answer was Google Domains. So it's doing what we want to do. It's just not putting our score in the email. So we'll have to troubleshoot that. That's actually a nice little troubleshooting piece that we can figure out, I think. But now you see, this is one small example. If I go to scripts.google.com, they're apparently not found. There is a tremendous amount. Let's go to google.com/scripts. I could just search for it, would probably be easier. That's not finding it either. Google Scripts. There we go. App Scripts. This is a great place to start learning. The other place I would start learning is Code Academy, which is where I've learned a lot of the JavaScript that I know. Okay, 2 things real quick, and then I'll be done. Number 1, you need to set up a trigger. You have to set up a trigger or this won't work. You need to tell your script when to run. So this is the trigger. I don't have any triggers set up right now. I've just been running it manually. So I click here to add a trigger. And this gives you a drop-down list with all of the functions that you have in this project. So this new script, I had that one my function, but I need to run grade exam. When do I want to run it? I want to run it from the spreadsheet. And I want to run it when the form is submitted. I can select here and get notifications on that. I'm not going to worry about that right now. But what this means is that I have a current trigger that will run from my spreadsheet every time the form is submitted. So when somebody does that, it's going to send them an email. So I'm going to troubleshoot that where it is adding their score in there. I'm going to need to figure out how to fix that. So I may have to change the way the message goes, but that's all right. That's one thing, which isn't too bad considering I just wrote the script tonight. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me, jody@edtech.works, and that's JODY. So hope this is helpful. I'll be talking to you again in another video.